The intent was to bring male and female, the two genders, together in order to have procreation for this new creation that comes on. Don't bring female and female of each chicken. Bring a cockerel and a chicken.
Hello and welcome to Sacred Book, in which two ex-military have a respectful and very long conversation about the Bible, both the New Testament and the Tanakh. And from the Christian perspective, our representative is...
Steve.
And from the atheist perspective, the representative is myself, Mark. Welcome. There are shorts, as usual, with this video, in which you can hear both Steve and I talk. More than you probably really want to listen to. But anyway, Steve, what did we talk about last time and what's about to happen?
So we sort of picked up from Genesis 6:13 and we went through to 6:16 and we looked at the vileness of humanity had come before God, almost like taking an audience with him and got his attention, and so prompted a response. He then gave an instruction to Noah to build this ark. We had a little discussion around gopher wood and where that comes from and the significance of that perhaps not being wood as we understand it, but could possibly even have been reeds, which would then link into a foreshadowing of Moses as he was placed in a reed basket, because the Hebrew word for Noah's ark is tavah, and the only other time that's used in the Bible is for Moses's basket, also a tavah. We discussed the fact that the ark was pitched with kafah, which is the Hebrew word for the pitching, and that word is also used in Leviticus 17:11 for atonement. And then we discussed and had a little chat about how the imagery used for the creation of this ark also does then link into the creation or the structure even of the Ark of the Covenant, which is where the Ten Commandments were kept in. Different Hebrew word. The Ark of the Covenant is Aaron. The structure, the three type of structure, pitched inside and outside, wood in the middle, gold overlay, wood, gold inlay. The fact that the mercy seat was sat on the top of the Ark of the Covenant, the fact that the Shekinah glory of God sat above the Ark of the Covenant, all resonates with the structure of the Ark of Noah, with the light being the indicator of the presence of God, and the pitching inside and out being the atonement, and how that all foreshadows, from a Christian perspective, the person of Jesus and the salvation that this guy Jesus offers, in so much as God was the designer of Noah's Ark, God was also the designer of salvation in Christ. One door was contained in the Ark of Noah. Jesus claimed that he is the only way, one door into relationship with God. The Ark of Noah had these three levels. The Ark of the Covenant has these three levels. And salvation in Christ has these three levels covering past, present and future, etc. We haven't got there yet, but we also look at the Spirit residing on the ark as the dove, which is very symbolic from a Christian perspective, which took us pretty much up to the end of verse 16. The only observation that I would make, which I haven't touched on, is it seems to be centered around a number of 60, all of these dimensions. And I haven't researched that. There seems to be a numerical focus.
It is worth discussing because in our other channel we talked about with time, counted in base 12, not base 10, on our hands. It's all to do with each finger has 3 segments, and if you're using your thumb to count, you can count in one hand 12, in two hands 24, but if you use the left hand to count every time you got to 12, you get to 60. 60 is that magic number for measurement that the ancients would have used because of base 12. I hadn't picked that up. Thank you, that's a very good point.
The first 11 chapters of Genesis, which is what we are focusing our discussion on, is something called mythohistory. That doesn't mean to say it's not true, but it means to say that the truths may be there in imagery and in language that we don't resonate with in an imperial scientific thinking mindset. So we need to just look for the truths of things. And that's not to say that it's not literally true, but don't make literalism your main focus. Seek the truth in this, and I think it will surprise you. And the Bible and the faith in this great spirit we call God the Father in Christianese is not going to be frightened of you asking questions of it.
Here's my question for you then. Verse 17. It's unusual. It's the first I think it's come across, if I remember, in which God is speaking and he uses I twice. And I, behold, I do bring the flood of waters upon the earth. Why is I repeated?
It's a good question. Often when a concept is repeated twice, it confirms a thing. By the testimony of 2 witnesses, a thing becomes. So when you see something stated in Scripture once, and then you see it stated again very close together, it's confirming that this thing is going to be. It's making a very strong statement. It sets a very clear boomf. That makes any sense to you?
It does, and what he's saying is that everything's going to be destroyed, but I will establish my covenant with thee. Now, the covenant comes later in a way, an explanation. It's not explained here, is it?
No.
So it's a foreshadowing.
I think so. You have the Adamic covenant, you have the Noahide covenant, and you have the Mosaic covenant, which come into play. The Mosaic covenant was very particular towards Israel and towards the Jewish people, but the Noahic covenant is a very significant covenant that's a universal covenant.
Well, I guess then we'll talk about the covenant when we get to it. The rest of verse 18 is talking about, you shall come into the ark, thou and thy sons and thy wife and thy son's wife with thee. We talked last episode that this is a sparse crew because this ark is not meant to sail off anywhere. It's going to either float or be moored until floodwaters are gone.
What the flood is introducing is it's undoing the creation that went before it. It's a chaos agent, if you like, which then set about the potential for salvation to come in the future as a result of judgment. So again, when you look at judgment, salvation, you focus Christ. The volume of the book is written about me. You focus Jesus on a cross of wood, whether the ark was wood, gopher wood, whether it is symbolic of other things. Judgment is carried out. People are atoned, pitched in this wooden structure, whatever it was. Judgment is levelled out at Christ on wood, who is the atoning sacrifice that then sits on the mercy seat, the Ark of the Covenant, which is also representative, as we talked about last time, of the Ark itself. The whole flood thing is a picture of creation going into total chaos again. But there is always that hope that will flow through it, because floating in the middle of this chaos, you've got this incredible hub of potential where there is the light representative of God, there is the atonement representative of the pitch and of the future work that Christ will do, and it is all lifted and brought through this to a place where things can be redeveloped later on, which is why I think that God says in the next verse, but I'm going to establish my covenant with you. He never lost them, he never lost them in that verse 18, did he? What interests me here is who he says in that verse 18, with you, your sons wives with you. So when you add that amount up, it's 8 people.
Yes.
And 8 is always a number of new beginnings.
And infinity.
So an octave, you play 8 notes on the keyboard and then you move to the next 8. So even with the amount of people that were within this container, whatever this container looks like, this ark, you have a hope of a new covenant which will bring new beginnings through judgment leading to salvation. It's very clever.
19.
So that brings us swiftly on to verse 19.
And 19. If you grew up like I did as a child, you went to Sunday school, the children's favourite was stories like this, and you had these pictures of these giraffes and lions, and they were all walking dutifully, marching onto the ark. So, possibly open to criticism. Except, and this is where I'm going to be very positive about this, I'm going to read verse 19, if you don't mind, and then I'm going to make a statement about it. And of every living thing of all flesh, 2 of every sort shalt thou bring into the ark, to keep them alive with thee. They shall be male and female. 2 of every sort. And people are thinking, what? There's going to be 2 llamas, and there's going to be 2 alpacas, and there's going to be 2 Frisians, and 2 yaks, and 2 types of chickens. Because we know about chickens. They've had a terrible time, haven't they? 2... How many animals are we talking about? It's impossible. Yes, it is impossible, but that's not the meaning that I would read into this. I would read it as this. And of every living thing of all flesh, they shall be male and female. Don't bring on 2 males. Don't bring on 2 females, because otherwise they're not going to mate. Make sure that whatever you choose, there's a male and a female. How many are you going to bring on? Well, 2 of every sort shall thou bring into the ark. What's sort? It could potentially be genus, class. 2 of every bovines, 2 of every porcines. In other words, 2 cattle. And then there'll be 2 ducks. And then there may be 2 pigs. Not every type of pig. That's how I would read it. We're still talking a lot of animals here. That would take a lot of investment to go and capture, to collect, to buy, to bring together, to keep in pens until the time they have to go onto the ark. And if I remember correctly, there's this increased sense of time that you got this amount of time, the rains are coming, you got to get them on board. So they would have been outside waiting to get on, because some would have been collected sometime before the floods arrived. So in other words, I don't think this is saying it's everything in the world, all the animals, that people think that's impossible. 2 of every sort shall thou bring into the ark, to keep them alive with thee. They shall be male and female, because otherwise you're going to have no food. I think the Hebrew word is type, sort, class, category, and genus. Am I off track here?
As I understand it, when I look at the Hebrew text, what's been translated there into the English as every sort or every kind is the Hebrew word kol, which means each, every, or anything. So I think that the point that you have made is absolutely spot on. What was the intent behind this? The intent was to bring male and female, the 2 genders, together in order to have procreation for this new creation that comes on. Don't bring female and female of each chicken. Bring a cockerel and a chicken. Don't just bring a male donkey and a male donkey. Bring a male and a female, so that we can have something moving forward. So I think that you're right, that the instruction there is very specific around that genus, if you like. Yeah. The other thing to remember here as well is, let's say that this actually happens in the way in which we can picture it, as all of these animals trotting up to their little abode, their little rooms on this ark, whether it's that was on the 3rd floor or whatever floor it was on. I gravitate to the fact that these were fully grown, fully developed animals.
Yes.
Why weren't they young? Why weren't they chicks? Why weren't they little puppies as opposed to fully grown adults? You could fit an awful lot of puppies in a box.
But also, you don't want 2 tired, knackered old animals that may struggle to recreate afterwards because they've gone beyond their reproductive cycle.
So you're going to go for the young and the fresh, right? Which gives you the capacity to contain more and to take more different types of things as well, in terms of different species of animal. Don't necessarily think of the fully grown animals marching up the ramp. Think of things that could have been collected as young. And there was a lot of time to collect and store and determine which things go in and which things don't go in.
That would also make sense with the point about food, because take thou unto thee of all food that is eaten, and gather it to thee. Now, we talked about the amount of effort it would have taken to get the wood, to store it, to make sure it's cut to shape. Same with the pitch. Well, same with the food. You have to have a vast network to bring in the food, the different types of food. But if they're younger, less in size, they won't need so much. If they're fully grown like lions, they require a lot of food. Babies, probably milk, because we're talking about a certain amount of time to overcome the floods, which is in days. It's an excessive amount of days, but not years.
Why wouldn't you pose those thoughts? Why wouldn't you ask those questions? You need to stretch your imagination a little bit, and you need to look and say, okay, if this literally happened, how could this have literally happened? Well, it could have happened by having very young. It could have happened by collecting young. If you were to take juvenile animals on board, 150 odd days, a juvenile, 6 months old, anything, very manageable. You can easily handle those sorts of things at 6 months. Even the biggest of animals, you could handle as 6-month-old. There's potential for all of that if you were to want a literal reading of it like that. But also remember what we're mirroring. Remember what the function of this story is. The function of this story is not so much about how it was done and the material side of it, but what's the overall functionality of it. The functionality of it is we've gone from God said, let there be light. There was chaos, there was order. Now God has placed light in this ark. There is going to be chaos from which order will be recreated. And so the very instruction that God uses in Genesis 6:20, or that's recorded, is of the fowl after their kind, the cattle after their kind, after its kind, mirrors and parallels the creation of account in that everything was created each according to its kind. And so we end up with this symmetry of the creation account. So it's like saying, think back to the creation, think back, everything's after its kind. Everything's going to be restored to some sort of right order and right practice. So there's more to it than just this literal reading of it. It's understanding the functional message behind it. We're going from chaos to creation, chaos to recreation. Everything will come back after its kind in a way in which it was set up at the very beginning to do so. Again, it's another message of hope. It's another message of putting your faith in the invisible, which is what Noah did, which is why he's a man of righteousness.
Thus did Noah, According to all that God commanded him, so did he. From the perspective of a modern reader reading the Bible, it seems to be coming to the end of this chapter and saying that Noah did everything that God commanded him. And that's saying a lot about Noah, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Although he does have a bit of a sketchy history in some of the rabbinical views around him. There are some who say he wasn't as righteous as he should have been because he looked after himself and didn't look after everybody else. And he should have been more focused on doing everything else. And there are others saying, no, actually, he actually did what God said he should do and got on and did his stuff. But it's the typology of Noah and it's the typology of creation. It's the mirroring of these accounts. So you have Noah, who's typical of a second Adam. He's also typical of being a redeemer because he saves people. And remember what his name is, comfort or rest. And so in that way, he also is a shadow or a representative of the trait of God himself as God rests on the seventh day. When everything has been re-established and everything has been established, God rests on the seventh day. And Noah, even by his name, he steps back out and he is rest. He brings things back into a state of repose where once again the breath of God, the heartbeat of God runs through the world. He mirrors what has been, he mirrors what is, and he is a foreshadowing of what is to come of Jesus, who is the one who brings the despairing comfort and rest, who is the one who offers his peace and offers his atonement and offers his rescue. So I think that there's a lot in that chap Noah, whether you believe it as symbolic or whether you believe it as anything else.
Also worth mentioning, not as an aside, it's actually very important, he's actually figured quite heavily in Islam, Nuh. And he is seen as being inspired by God, and he talks about the doom approaching mankind, and great respect in Islam. As an atheist reading this, what do I take out of it? Well, hope. The message seems to be prepared, be humble. You're not perfect. Interestingly, early on he's talked perfect in his generation, which we interpret that as being untainted by chaos. There's a temptation, I think, if you didn't know that, to think, well, this man's perfect, so how come he gets drunk later? He's human, but he had faith in God, and he was prepared, as you said last episode, to be mocked and vilified, possibly attacked. When the floods came, and I've got a lot to talk about that in the next episode when the floods do come, there would have been mass panic in the area, and there would have been people thinking, right now we've got to get what this guy's been collecting, and we've all been laughing at. You're not laughing now, are you? And they're all attacking, and it would have to put all that. And at the very base level, in a modern context, he's saying philanthropy. Think of animals, think of others, look positively to the future. Well, that certainly is a template that everybody should hold up with reverence because we need more of that in today's world, don't we?
Gosh, we so do. And remember, right at the very beginning of our conversations, all those years ago now, we talked about scriptures like Shrek. You know, it's got layers. And it's got layers and layers and layers and layers and layers. And we can draw all of this meaning from it. And as we drill deeper and deeper into it, we will find, from the Christian perspective, the core of it. And the core of it, I believe, is the person of Jesus. So there is lots of truth. And I've said before, there's lots of truth in lots of religions around the world. Islam has lots of truths in it. Other religions and other religious beliefs have lots of truth in them, which we can all benefit from and which can enlighten us. Even this little story, the founder of the Baha'i movement, Baha'u'llah, I think his name was, and he uses the symbol of the ark in his writings. One of his writings says this: be an ornament to the countenance of truth, a crown to the brow of fidelity, a pillar of the temple of righteousness, a breath of life to the body of mankind, an ensign of the hosts of justice, a luminary above the horizon of virtue, a dew to the soil of the human heart, an ark on the ocean of knowledge, a sun in the heaven of bounty, a gem on the diadem of wisdom, a shining light in the firmament of thy generation, a fruit upon the tree of humility. So he used this ark as a concept and a symbol of spiritual protection, safety from unwise actions, and in that sense alone, if you were to just view it like that, and I'm not suggesting that you go off and become a Baha'i, but I'm saying that there are truths that you can draw from these stories that are going to enrich you and benefit you. And as you walk this journey, Jesus will meet you. That's the Christian faith. The other thing that we don't pick up here, but that is made explicit later on in Genesis, is that it wasn't just two animals. So Genesis 7 verse 2, it talks about Noah was commanded to take 7 clean and 2 unclean of every animal into the ark. Yeah. Maybe we'll talk about that when we get to Genesis 7. It foreshadows Israel's sacrificial system. Clean and unclean animals, clean and unclean laws. Everything is a foreshadowing of this system, which would then become illustrative of the 2 groups in humanity in Jewish thinking. You had the Jews and you had the Gentiles. The Jews who are clean and the Gentiles who are unclean.
Because you go from 2 of every sort and then suddenly you've got 7s and 2s. For some people, there are 2 sources here. One's Yahwist, one's priest. Because the Yahwist talks about the evil of mankind. I think they're fascinated with the numbers 7 and 40. And the priest talks about the goodness of man and wanting to do what's right for God. They seem to have 2 different interests. As I imagine you're reading it for the first time and you go on, you think, hang on, didn't they just say 2 of each sort? What's this 7s? As a Christian, how do you process that? Why the sudden change?
Is 7 an odd number or an even number?
Well, it's odd.
It's odd. So clearly 7 being an odd number, it has got to be 7 pairs.
Right. Ah, yeah, different. Okay. Pairs and sorts are different. Yeah, all right.
So we're looking at 7 pairs of unclean, not 7 of that animal and 2 of that. 7 pairs of every kind of clean animal and 2 of every kind of unclean, male and female. So you're looking at pairings. There's no contradiction in that because you're still looking at 2s.
That's foreshadowing because, and I'm going to bring this up when we get to chapter 7, 7 and 40 do jump out at you. 7 is 7 and 7 days.
This is a focus on the numbers. You know, the numbers are significant. And why was it 7 pairs? What does this mean? Because it means something. And so those are the questions that you should be asking.
Nearly all faiths around the world have flood narratives.
Humanity, no matter where you go in the globe, every ancient civilization pretty much will have some sort of flood story that is significant to their legends, that is significant to where they've come from. It's amazing. There is something within the deep collective memory of humanity that shares this common belief. Whatever you think of Graham Hancock, whether you think he's a whack job or whether you think whatever he might be. It's a very interesting series on Netflix about the ancient apocalypse, I think he called it. And it's about a flood which he believes happened 12,000 years ago and wiped out vast areas of places. And the legends and the myths that have been fed from that and how the land was repopulated and how it was helped by people who were like almost like angelic beings and that sort of thing. It's very, very fascinating. And even the sort of repurposing of how things got going again. There is rabbinical teaching that talks about the angel Raphael coming down and helping Noah and his crew to actually sort things out. That there was an outside force that stepped into our dimension in order to help things move along again. There's so much stuff there that you shouldn't just throw away. Just because we're so fixated on this scientific, rational thinking, we're missing something.
One of my pet peeves is how we bracket people all the time, and you've got to be in this bracket and you can't step out of it. And you are right to say we should consider other faiths for the truths that they have. They have stories shared in common. It's not exclusive necessarily in all cases with all things. And as an atheist, I would say to other atheists, take your science, but also take the truths that are lifted out from such as this. Don't say it's wrong because it's happened to be in the Bible. That's a mistake I made for years. The benefit for me for this project is it's reinforcing how that was wrong, and that so many commentaries about what we are and what happened in the past are contained in these books, and we would be foolish to ignore it.
Absolutely, because we are not just random pieces of material chucked together, and not everything that is true can be scientifically proven. There's certain metaphysical truths that you cannot prove. There's lots of stuff that we cannot prove that we take for granted as being true. I think that we've been conned. You know, human beings have been robbed. We've been robbed by the societies that we've grown up in, where we are being forced into this way of think. You must think this way, and anything that sits outside of that is clearly wrong and dangerous. Well, I think that anything that is forcing us into a channel that says you are not allowed to look outside of this channel is wrong and dangerous. And I would encourage and advocate very strongly that of whatever religious background, spiritual background, non-spiritual background, atheistic background, agnostic, whatever you might call yourself, be open to the wonder of humanity outside of the material, because there is something far greater. I didn't always think that, but that's where I've arrived. We've got a lot of common ground that we share and that we should be willing to be gracious to each other about.
And for those listening, the dear subscriber, I'm tempted to apologise for the fact that we do keep talking about you shouldn't be knocking this and blah, blah, blah. But I think we're in a world such where people are coming to these videos for the first time. We have to keep repeating this. Because unfortunately, it's not to defend what we're saying. It's to say to others, don't just dismiss things offhand. Please take the time and consideration to enrich your own understanding in life. Don't turn away just because you think it's not for you. Everything that's contained in this kind of scripture is for us. That's the thing. You say we've robbed humanity of certain things. We rob ourselves of our own humanity if we don't consider these opinions, and that's where I think we will end.
It's a beautiful world out there. Go and enjoy it.
I will. I'm going to do that right now.